Hello and welcome to today's webinar, where we're going to be exploring what the employee experience will look like in the hybrid world of work and, crucially, what this means for employers and HR teams. My name is David Richter. I'm the Director of Marketing at Ciphr. Ciphr is a specialist provider of SaaS, HR, payroll, recruitment and learning software through our HCM platform, Ciphr Connect. And the thing that sets Ciphr Connect apart is we don't just provide seamless integration across our own suite of software, but we integrate with specialist solutions across the wider people management ecosystem. A great example of the power of these integrations is with our most recent integration partner, Peakon. The integration between Ciphr's HR software and Peakon enables organizations to gain a holistic view of their people data, connecting the dots between factors such as location, line manager, training, career progression, and reward, with employee feedback and engagement, so organizations can make more intelligent decisions about their people initiatives. Really pleased today to be joined by Patrick Cornoyer, Chief Evangelist at Peakon, and Megan Hope, Ciphr's Partner Manager. A very warm welcome to you both.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Hi, everybody.
Hello. So onto the agenda. Many organizations only turned their attention to the concept of employee experience over the past few years, only to find that COVID has accelerated the shift to distributed and remote working, forcing them to rethink what it means to be an employee. We'll look at how employee experience might be redefined and reimagined for the hybrid world of work, one in which many traditionally office-based staff will split their times between corporate workspaces, home offices, and even co-working spaces. We're going to look at how and why it is that what employees want from their employers is shifting, how to hire and onboard new starters when it's 100% remote, the role that digital tools can play in improving and streamlining the employee experience, and how to evaluate employees' experiences and develop action plans to make improvements. This webinar is being recorded, and if you're watching live, the recording will be emailed to you tomorrow. Do send in your questions, comments, and queries during the webinar. You should see a small control panel on your screen. If it's collapsed, just hit the orange arrow button to open the messaging window. Now, before I hand over to Patrick, we're going to kick off today's webinar with a quick poll to try and find out whether the dramatic increase in remote working is only going to be temporary or whether it's going to be a more permanent shift. And I'd encourage as many of you as possible to complete this poll, as it will give a truer picture of what's going on. So bear with me while I launch this poll. And the question is if COVID-19 was eradicated tomorrow, how would this affect how your employees work? And the options for you to select are, well, you're 100% remote work anyway, so it wouldn't really affect you. Everyone would go back to how they worked previously. You'd expect maybe a small increase in remote working. You'd expect a large increase in remote working, or maybe it's going so well for you, remote working, that you're never going to go back to the office. So Patrick, while we're waiting for people to give their answers, do you want to talk us through your expectations for what the results might show?
Yeah, I think that the majority of people are probably going to say a large increase in remote working, just seeing how our portfolio companies have been experiencing expectations around remote work, how employees have been enjoying it, and how it's becoming part of the fabric of organizations. I would think the majority would at least say small, but I would say probably the majority would say large increase in remote working.
Yeah, do you know what? I'm inclined to agree.
Yeah, I don't think they'll say never go back to the office. I do think a lot of organizations will still have offices, but I do think the majority will be remote.
Yeah, I agree. I think the hesitation that we certainly had as a business was our experience when people were working remotely and having to dial into meetings where they were the only person on a call and everyone else was sat face to face. And that didn't work very well for the people around the meeting room. And it didn't work certainly for the person on the call. But actually, when everyone's doing it remotely, the technology that's available now is very, very helpful at enabling all of that. So we've had a really good set of responses. Thank you very much. I'm going to close that poll now and share the results. And yeah, very, very, very happy to report, Patrick, you're absolutely bang on. Most people are expecting at least some increase in remote working, and it is very heavily weighted towards well, yeah, it's the large increase in remote working is what's expected. So thank you everyone very much for taking part in that poll. That's all very interesting. So Patrick, on that note, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for having Peakon join. Everyone, thank you for spending some time this morning. I'll just give you a quick overview of who we are at Peakon and what we believe, and also some context around our data set, because today I'm going to be talking about how we come up with the insights from our data to help organizations like yours understand what employees are expecting today and what potential trends are here for the future to help you with your strategic decisions as you're building out your world of work and your next chapter at your organizations. So at Peakon, we are an employee success platform, and we are focused on turning employee feedback into real-time actionable insights. We, at the core of what we do, believe that work should work for people. We have over 1,000 organizations that use Peakon across the globe, and those organizations range anywhere from 100 employee size organizations to over 250,000 employees. And about every second, someone in the world somewhere is answering a Peakon survey question, and about every 4 to 5 seconds, they're leaving a comment for their organization. So the key here is that this incredibly strong set of data allows us to understand what people have to say. And over the past couple of months, our employees have had a lot to say. We've analyzed that data. Particularly over a 6-month period, we analyzed about 10 million of these 100 million data points. We actually just reached 100 million data points, and I'll tell you a little bit about those today. So when we look at employee expectations, we know employee expectations are constantly evolving. And the truth is that the pandemic has had the biggest impact of work and has had the biggest change on the world of work in the past 12 years since the financial crash of 2008. And we know, and I'm sure you feel this as well as business leaders, is that we just simply can't take a reading of employee expectations once a year or even twice a year. We all need to stay on top of how expectations are evolving. Our businesses are evolving at a pace that we've never seen. And if we're not listening to our employees and their expectations, we definitely run the risk of losing them. Employees have expectations around how they interact with their company culture, how they are integral parts of building whatever their product may be, and how they drive their business and how they individually are part of that process. I'll dig in a little bit more on how employee expectations have evolved through this year. And I wouldn't say COVID has necessarily created new expectations of employees, but it's definitely accelerated existing ones. We looked at quite a few in 2019 and it has accelerated those. And it's also very much changed how we look at employee expectations for the future. So the first place we'll start is with flexible working. Now, as we just talked about in that poll question, remote working is obviously going to be a big part of our futures, and it is here to stay. And we've settled in over the past couple of months with our new routines, and even despite the circumstances, we have, as organizations, really made work the best that it can for our organizations. But we all know things right now are not normal. We are all going through an inflection point. We're all figuring out how we're going to build the future of work. So we know that remote working is no longer a nice to have, it's absolutely a need to have. And employees are going to expect more flexibility. When we looked at employee expectations in 2019, this was already an expectation that was of employees, especially younger generations within your workforce. But these expectations around work-life balance have absolutely evolved over the past couple of months because, quite frankly, they have had to. And there has been a change to expectations around flexible working and hybrid workspaces. So let's talk quickly about what a hybrid workspace is, because hybrid workspaces, it's a term that we've talked about, but we're all creating our own hybrids right now, and they're all unique. And Microsoft recently just offered their employees the option to work from home less than 50% of the time once they reopen their offices. And also, with their manager approval, employees actually could permanently work from home. This is a significant decision for a large organization like Microsoft. Also, Ford, for example, the auto manufacturer, has found that 70% of its workforce that can do work from a remote location or virtually, they're less inclined to return to the office. So they're looking at trialing systems to be able to allow employees to come into the office when they need to, but still be able to work from a remote workspace. And just recently, Gartner did an HR session that showed that there's this whole variety in an alternative third space, which is maybe working from a coffee shop, working from a cafe or a rented private space to allow for employees to have a change in scenery. So there's a lot of different perspectives right now with hybrid workplaces, and we're all figuring out which one is going to work for our organization. And I'll just say it is unique to you. There is no one right answer to this, and we're all here to figure out how it's going to work specifically for our teams. The next area that we looked into is well-being, and the pandemic has very much shown a bright light on the importance of well-being with employees. Between April and May, we saw that nearly 16% of comments that were left in Peakon, so those 20 million comments that I mentioned earlier on, were specifically on the topic of well-being. And with managers, it was even a higher percent, it was 35%. And that has been consistent. The high comment rate from managers and from employees around well-being has been consistent over the past couple of months. The most common words that we saw appearing in this data was mental health, anxiety, stress. And so all of this is very critical to employees' experience at work, but also directly affecting their level of engagement. So we absolutely have to protect the well-being of our employees because there is a tangible connection between employee engagement and business outcome. And well-being is a key driver right now for employees and their engagement. So if we keep a focus on employees' well-being, we keep that as our number one priority in a lot of ways, right? Especially right now, while we're still going through this inflection point and trying to figure out what our future is, then we will keep our employees connected, hopefully be increasing employee engagement, which ultimately helps to increase the employee experience and ultimately helps with our business outcomes. Another area that we looked at was diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is an incredibly important focus. We all know this. The Black Lives Matter movement has absolutely helped organizations realize that they need to be doing more in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they also just need to be doing it better than before. Employees have started to question their organizations, and they have a louder voice around their expectations around organizations' DE&I initiatives. And also business leaders are now understanding better than they ever have what they need to do to connect with DE&I initiatives and ultimately how it represents their businesses. We know that diverse organizations have healthier profits, but ultimately it's not just about healthier profits. Employees are going to be expecting their personal beliefs, their personal value systems, personal cultures to be representative of what their organization's values, beliefs, cultures are as well. So for us to be able to build the strongest diverse organizations moving forward, we have to make connections with our corporate values, corporate connections, and what, not even just the words, but how we act and how we represent ourselves and how we're doing business in a diverse and equitable way. That is all going to be resonating with our employees, and they are going to have, and they already do, and they're going to continue to have expectations around this. So let's look at how are we going to adapt our employee engagement strategies in the hybrid world of work. A true employee engagement strategy is really an actionable plan for measuring and managing employee engagement levels. So for us to really ensure that success in this area affects the broader business strategy, we need to be able to link employee engagement to clearly defined business outcomes. Business leaders are increasingly able to recognize that employee engagement is central to business success. And if there isn't a clear approach around measuring and managing engagement, then organizations, and more specifically leaders in organizations, are going to struggle to retain their people, because having a voice at an organization, having that voice heard, and change happening within an organization based on the employee's voice and what your employees need has never been more impactful or critical. So a lot of times we talk about employee engagement strategies getting attention at the C level, and that is incredibly important. And recently they've gotten far more attention at the C level as we navigate the current situation and the current economy. However, we have been presented our biggest challenge so far, and leaders are having to adapt to employee strategies. And this continuous listening approach and this continuous approach of checking in with your employees on a regular basis is very much part of what future success looks like. So let's talk about a few essential characteristics of a good employee engagement strategy. So first, employees need to feel connected to the business strategy. Employees need to know that there is a shared sense of purpose that keeps not only leadership, but employees connected during challenging times. We've seen that work really well. The organizations that have done the best with keeping employees engaged are the ones that have been able to connect employees to the business strategy over the past 6 months. That's been a hard thing because businesses are figuring out what their strategy is. But those businesses that have been focused on keeping employees connected every step of the way, every week with strategy initiatives, those are the ones that have had the most success. The second area is that employees need to feel that they're consistently developing and progressing. Our data shows that one of the most important indicators of employees leaving a business, leaving your organization, is the feeling that they're no longer being challenged. And that is something that, again, younger generations are very much expecting, that they have a very clear individual development plan and that they are progressing on a constant basis. So we need to focus in those areas when we think about good employee engagement strategies. The third is employees need to feel able to discuss pay and remuneration. Pay is not, or is one of the most emotive issues in the workplace, but it's not so much about pay. It's always about having a conversation about pay. Can your employees have an open, honest conversation about pay? It's not always, our data shows it's not so much about money. It's about, can employees have and discuss pay in a constructive way? Employees understand when they understand what the rationale is behind what they earn and what the opportunity is for future earnings, then engagement increases. Flexible working packages also could really help organizations to relieve pressure and increase engagement for many employees as well. And the fourth area is managers have to be equipped and empowered to drive engagement. We need to empower our managers. Employee engagement is not just the responsibility of HR. It's not just the responsibility of C-level. Managers now are responsible for so much with their employees. And if managers are empowered to make meaningful connections with their teams and with each individual on their teams, then they will be able to drive better engagement because they're just gonna be able to have better conversations with their employees. Managers are absolutely the critical link between engagement and employees and their organization. So we are in an evolving and dynamic state of employee engagement. I'm sure you feel the same way. A couple of quick key facts: make sure you prioritize employee well-being. As I said, the data shows this is critically important. Individuals need to have room to have their own individual routines as we start looking at hybrid and remote work models. Recognize all new types of achievement. This is an area that is incredibly important to employees that are no longer in the office. We need to find ways to recognize and to share achievement and make sure that people feel like they are progressing. Progressing is not always about moving forward in a career level. It can be just about doing a great job and having it recognized and having those achievements recognized on a public level. And the fourth is really just ensuring inclusivity no matter where people work. So this focus area has probably never been more important. That sense of belonging, it's a key component to engagement. As we adopt this hybrid working model, we really need to understand that the relationship between our organizations and our employees, they've never felt as much disruption as they have. However, that presents a great opportunity. It's a big challenge, but it presents a great opportunity to find new ways of making individualized connections. I promise you, by focusing on managers, empowering them to make those personalized connections, we will have success in these areas. So ultimately, we just need to listen to our employees. Organizations that draw up effective employee engagement strategies working with their employees, they have historically been limited in so many different ways to measure engagement. Annual employees, they're just not measuring and providing real-time insights, and managers need right now regular real-time insights to be able to build those relationships and course correct in the right areas. There's just a need for us to focus on how do we empower the employee's voice? How do we empower our managers? And then how do we become agile as organizations, because our businesses are changing very quickly. So how do we change and keep up our employee experience, our employee engagement programs at the same pace that the world and that our businesses are changing at? And the best way to do that is to have a really sound, continuous, active listening program with employees. So I will pause here and hand it back over to you,
Brilliant.
David.
Thank you very much. Thanks,
Thank
Patrick.
you.
That was excellent. Really enjoyed that.
Thanks.
Megan, I'm going to hand over to you now, please, so you can look at how organisations ensure that in this sort of shift to working remotely, that they're actually able to hire and onboard their workforce effectively.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, David, and thanks, Patrick. So yeah, when we look at how to hire and onboard new starters virtually, you probably want to assess what's actually been successful for you in your existing face-to-face hiring and onboarding processes. So you figure out how to replicate those successes as far as possible for these new starters who are joining now remote teams, and then look for items that you'll need to add or remove from that new starter program. But actually, before you even look at that process as well, for each role that you're hiring virtually, you need to really clearly define the person, so the types of skills, experience, and mindset that will be right for the job. We've now got a great opportunity to give employees the freedom to decide how, when, and where they can work most productively, and really importantly, thrive as individuals. So people do need the freedom to balance their own competing priorities, and as Patrick said, make work for them. And then you need to determine your essentials both for the person and for the role. And obviously you might think you're already doing that, and surely a lot of it is common sense. But as we do move and continue to evolve in this hybrid working model, there is a sense of going back to basics and everybody having total clarity about how you will recruit, retain, and reward the very best talent in the future. So of course you should be guided by your company vision and your values, and look for candidates where they demonstrate those traits and they're consistent across the board. For example, you might say that your essentials are that the candidate is self-motivated, self-disciplined, an effective communicator, results-orientated, or tech-savvy. And yes, these might all sound basic, but really that's why they are your essentials. Because if that employee who is now working from home fully or even part-time doesn't have these essential values or can't demonstrate these essential behaviours, then the potential impact on collaboration, culture and performance is really huge. And of course, getting technology right is also critical. There's little that's more off-putting to candidates than a difficult to use or time-consuming applicant tracking system or interviewing software that simply doesn't work. It will give a really poor impression of the digital capabilities of your organization. And really, this is one of the highlights of how you're trying to sell yourself to candidates now as well. The digital capabilities are really what's going to make them an effective remote worker or for hybrid working. And ultimately, if you can't communicate effectively with your candidates during the hiring process, can they really expect effective communication and collaboration when they eventually do join your team? So investing in a modern applicant tracking system really is now a must. For example, there's Ciphr iRecruit, and that can pay dividends by helping you to identify and manage the best candidates for your vacancies. And if you are hiring in volume, then specialist video interviewing platforms, which enable candidates to pre-record responses to critical interview questions, can help you really quickly identify those individuals where it's worth investing the time for a full interview. You then want to kind of discover the candidate's intention. So once you've established your essentials and your needs, and you've got that right technology in place, make sure you understand your candidate and what they're looking for from this new hybrid working world. Ask why they want to work in a hybrid environment, because there does have to be a motivating factor behind the desire to work from home that makes this world valuable to them and establishes to you their commitment and desire to succeed. It could be they're looking for simplified childcare arrangements, they want to reduce or eliminate a commute, pet care, freedom to relocate and move house. So find out what they're looking for and understand if they're willing to make an extra effort and commitment to you and your organisation if it means that they can now work from home. And don't forget to ask getting to know you questions. So in previous face-to-face hiring, when meeting new people generally, 55% of the impact comes from the way the person dresses, acts and walks through the door. and 67% of bosses say failure to make eye contact is a common non-verbal error. However, when we're recruiting virtually, even when relying on video and virtual calls, there's definitely a barrier to interpreting body language. So you do need to ask the right questions and ensure that you're building trust and honesty, and that those they can be established. So that person being open, introducing themselves, and that they can establish relationships that they can build on when working remotely is really key. And competency questions do also have a role to play, but make sure that they include, if it's relevant, scenarios specific to a hybrid working model. So talk to people about their interests and their values, and for example, how would they resolve conflicts or miscommunications now that they're working remotely? So yes, of course, you need to establish they're qualified for the role, but can this person mesh into the company dynamic? And also then just a note of caution here. So when you are discussing sort of out of work interests with candidates, it can be really easy to fall into a trap of preferring individuals with shared hobbies or viewpoints to yourself. But diversity of thought and background is really essential for high performing teams, as Patrick touched upon as well. So treat these questions as a way of finding out how easily you can have open conversations, and don't treat the presence or perhaps absence of shared interests as a deal breaker. And then thinking about how to onboard remotely. So you've successfully hired a great candidate for your vacancy, and now it's time to make sure they have a fantastic onboarding experience. You want them to feel welcome into your organization, its culture. You want them to get to know people from across not only their team, but other departments, and to become a happy, engaged, and productive staff member as quickly as possible. Again, with virtual onboarding, it's likely that you'll be looking to replicate the most successful parts of your in-person experience using technology, as well as hopefully making enhancements to that program that can help to mitigate the negatives of joining an organization as a hybrid or fully remote worker. So the first area to look at is around streamlining and improving your onboarding processes. HR really have an opportunity now, almost an unprecedented opportunity, in taking a lead to drive transformation in the organisation. So onboarding remotely doesn't have to mean simply taking your own old process and making it online, or them just doing the same steps but they're now at home. So seize this opportunity to change and improve the steps if necessary. Maybe consider online contract signatures via Adobe Sign or DocuSign, online benefits portals to enroll in benefits, policy acceptance, perhaps employee self-service for inputting their personal details, bank details, emergency contact, all available through Ciphr's onboarding tool as well. And of course, then we need to look at establishing personal connections. So traditionally, on your first day, you'd be shown around the office, introduced to co-workers and team members. And establishing these connections is really a key part of that process, and we don't want to forget it because there's no physical office tour. So consider maybe assigning a welcome buddy, maybe somebody that's of a similar level, or just generally a friendly face, but ideally who has gone through the traditional onboarding process and can help and advise on how to have a successful start at the company. But don't just stop there. So establish ongoing touch points and check-ins. It's really critical to maintaining culture and keeping remote employees engaged, motivated and connected, especially for new hires, but for your existing employees as well. And then depending on the size of your organization or team is really how these touch points and check-ins, what they might look like. So it could be an office-wide virtual meeting, daily stand-ups. You might look to have regular video updates from the CEO or virtual team celebrations. And you might make it a requirement for managers to have daily or weekly check-ins with their teams and direct reports. The key is really to develop a regular schedule for interaction and communication so no one feels isolated or alone. So remember, those chance interactions and encounters we had with colleagues that we took for granted when we were in the office have to be deliberately engineered now we're in the remote or hybrid workplace. And as teams do fracture and disperse, naturally people will join, people will leave. How individuals, teams and the whole organisation transfers knowledge and onboards new people does then get even tougher. So don't be afraid to adjust that new starter journey. Maybe consider rolling out information or training at a slower pace or in a different order. Really give that new hire every chance for success and to ask for help if they need it. It could look like adding flexibility, letting them know that they can work their way through onboarding information at their own pace and in their own hours. because the more they can learn about the company, about other departments, the deeper their understanding of everyone's roles and responsibilities, and the better connections that they will have with colleagues. And of course, the best way to evaluate if your onboarding program is actually working well is to ask those new starters who've experienced it. This could be through check-ins very informally, or ideally through digital tools such as Peakon or Pulse survey tools, where you can really then measure and begin to improve based on the feedback you're getting. And that then does take us on to how digital tools can improve and streamline the employee experience. So when we all moved en masse to remote working in March 2020, we actually just recreated many of the old habits and defaults of the office, but now virtually. So we must do video calls and online meetings because we've always done meetings, but that really has come at a price. So actually our working days are now 15% longer. Recurring meetings are up by 25%, and interruptions in our working day are up by 25% too. And actually, instant messages sent between 6 p.m. and midnight have increased by 52% since March 2020. So really, how can we make sure that digital tools help rather than hinder us? And we do need to recognise that obviously technology is one of the elements that binds remote teams together, but you need to be really clear and consistent with your procedures to avoid conflict. So set some standards and ensure hybrid working doesn't lead to multiple standards or cultures between teams, departments, perhaps even countries. That could look like guidance around putting your camera on, guidance on pets on screen, your appearance, tardiness, expectations over working hours. And maybe something as simple as having a note in your email signature to say, I may email outside of conventional working hours, but there's no need to reply outside of your working hours, can make a really big difference to how people feel. And over time, our behaviours online will evolve, and in the hybrid workplace, we'll recognise which meetings or conversations will be most valuable to be held face-to-face, if possible, and which can then be done virtually. And also we need to be clear about communication. So a common complaint among employees is that their employer doesn't share any information or doesn't communicate frequently enough with them. And employees really want transparent communication about what the future of work looks like and their role within it. Without communication, feelings of uncertainty, fear, and mistrust can grow. And transparency will help motivate, engage, and excite people about the changes and opportunities ahead. In a hybrid workplace, aim towards equality. So ideally, all workers would be in the office on the same days, although clearly this may be impractical for socially distanced offices. And leaders should then be in the same boat as employees where possible. So consider the unintentional exclusion of remote workers. For example, when you hold a meeting, hold it with an equal approach. Either everybody is face-to-face or everybody is remote and on their own device. That way everyone can be seen and heard and communication can be explicit and to the point. The efficient hybrid workplace doesn't demand that everybody works the same hours and at the same pace, although of course occasionally this is necessary. But really we need a mix of synchronous and asynchronous communication methods to help us. And then look to embrace technology and data analytics to drive efficiency, consistency and visibility. So acknowledge the potential for data analytics and identifying trends and helping you spot issues before they become problems. Use technology such as Ciphr HR that can automate processes and integrate with other business systems to free up that precious HR resource and focus on transformation in the organisation. And of course, measure, as Peakon and Patrick mentioned earlier. So embrace technology that empowers your managers in actually managing their people and provides them with the tools that they need to prompt and take action. And with all of these aspects, when we're thinking about technology, you really need to be focused on creating a fantastic user experience. So the technology should support and enable and empower people to reach their full potential. And if you're not sure what that looks like or how that would work, then again, you need to ask your employees. There's an increasing need for business and HR leaders to engage with their employees around this future vision of work. You need to welcome their input, share ideas, and have meaningful and honest conversations with them. Hybrid work tends to include more freedom around when to work as well as where, and it generally grants more autonomy to employees to fit work around the rest of their lives, rather than structuring other parts of a weekday around hours logged in an office. But ideally, it's the best of both worlds, structure and sociability on one hand, and independence and flexibility on the other. And on that note, I'll hand back to you, David.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Megan, and thanks you also, Patrick. Those were both really interesting presentations. Right, it's time now for us to answer your questions. So please do send them in using the questions function in your webinar control panel. We've had a few come through already during the webinar. First one I'll ask towards you, Patrick, please. It's, does a hybrid work model change the marketplace for both employers and employees?
Yeah, I think it does. Because I think organizations are going to start seeing many more potential employees expect hybrid work models. So it's not only going to be well, actually, I think it won't just be a competitive edge. I think it's going to be an expectation that we all have it. So maybe in the past, flexible working has been a benefit or something unique, but now I think that it's just going to be standard expectation. But beyond that, it's going to have to be the most effective flexible working. So, and to be honest, I think so many organizations are saying, well, what is the most effective? But the key that employees, I think, are going to be wanting is that they're going to want to help build whatever this flexible working environment is and this hybrid working environment is. So not only is the expectation of the employee or the potential employees, so applicants, they're going to expect to have it, but they're also going to expect to be a part of how it evolves. Because the other thing we have to keep in mind is that we may be building a hybrid or flexible work model for 2021, but that probably is going to have to change or will change in 2022 and 23, 24, right? So what we're building today, as we have found out over the past 6 to 9 months, is really only good for a certain amount of time. So it's going to be, I feel it's going to evolve over the next 3 years. So the expectation is just going to be there. It's not going to be a nice to have anymore. It's going to be a table stakes, I think.
Yeah. Interestingly, from the other side, I've seen a few organisations are taking an approach where they're making changes to their employee contracts along the lines of, well, look, your place of work is no longer the office; it's going to be from home if you want it to. But that alongside that comes a slight reduction in salary, and then putting that to their employees about which option they would prefer. Would they like to go back to the office, or would they like to change their role to be being fully remote? And I think in the two instances I'm aware of, the employees, not entirely unanimously, but it has been a landslide, have voted for, no, really, we would like to continue working from home full time, please. And if that comes with a 5-10% reduction in pay, that's fine, because the benefits far outweighing the costs.
I agree with that. I think that will be the general consensus with employees when you think about how much they have to pay for commuting and the time. And the other employees have also done a really good job of starting to, at the start of the pandemic, I think it was hard for employees to find the difference of the line between work-life balance. And people say, well, now you're living from work as opposed or working from home or living at work. But basically, they've gotten more comfortable with the blurred line because of all of the benefits of being able to take a half hour or an hour out to go and drop their kids off at school or to do something during the day. So I think that will be the trend for sure.
I guess the challenge posed by that, though, is that unless you're very purposeful about ensuring you do always get a significant chunk of downtime, there is, I guess, an increased risk of burnout, isn't there?
Absolutely. And that is something that we've significantly seen as well, is that there is anxiety around burnout and around, and that goes into a whole other area around productivity, and organizations that are hyper focused right now on productivity. If there's one thing I can say to organizations, please don't be focused on productivity right now. Be focused on autonomy and building trusted relationships with your employees. Productivity will follow from that. But those employees that feel that their organizations are super focused on productivity, that's where they start getting that stressed of, well, what is my light on Slack at 8 o'clock in the morning? And, if I don't respond within 15 minutes, how is that going to be looked upon? And like all of that doesn't matter. Managing to work output as opposed to work time could not be more important than it is today. And focus on autonomy and trust as opposed to productivity is really where the best organizations are seeing success. And productivity is happening. Higher productivity is happening in organizations where employees feel a higher level of autonomy and a higher level of trust.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Megan, I've got one come through for you, which is around how do we hire for cultural fit when working remotely?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I think looking at anything with regards to culture and hybrid as well, because actually culture of an organization, but also of a society, it's never standing still. So if we were to ask everybody on the call to define their culture back in January or this time last year, and then define it now, likely the answers would be very, very different. So I think a really key starting point is actually around that definition and really kind of coming back to those core values, which I mentioned at the start. So the core values that you're looking for in your people, what are those essentials, as well as then what are those essentials that are already being demonstrated and being successful with your current employee base, is a really good starting point, but also an awareness that actually that engagement is a constantly evolving and ongoing pressure as well. So it does basically start with understanding what your culture is, what you're looking for, what are those essentials that that person must have. And that's where I think, as you mentioned earlier with Patrick, that if it's a bit of a war between talent and between where people want to work, how they want to work, you might begin to only hire people that have experience with remote working. That could be your essential. But be careful with things like that, because these are all skills that you can easily kind of train people in, that you can support them in developing. And so actually you might have a key demographic within your existing employee base, that actually are still apprehensive about home working or hybrid working for a long period of time and thought that it would all be over by now. So you really need to go back to basics with what your existing culture is, how you can sort of help support all of those people that that are already your employees, and help define using their input around your culture, and then look for other people that will mesh into that dynamic, that will then continually help it to evolve. And that those people then need to have a really great onboarding process so that they stay engaged and do then help your culture to develop, your business to grow, and to everybody to then stay sort of engaged and as happy and productive employees, as opposed to, as Patrick mentioned, maybe living very much hand to mouth or dealing with a lot of the stress and anxiety. When will this all be over? A lot of it is around communication, that actually this is what the culture that we're looking to define, these are the behaviors we want people to be able to demonstrate, and these are the people that we're going to try and hire.
Yeah, I also know that there are some companies that specialize in it's surveying and finding the kind of value fit of potential candidates before you hire them. So not just hiring for the people for the same background and experience, because as you mentioned, Megan, earlier on, that will just create groupthink and will be quite negative to the organization. But hiring for consistency in the values that the organization believes in and wants to demonstrate is quite an important part of the hiring process sometimes too.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, so that you don't inhibit yourselves by everybody thinking and acting in the same way, but actually that we've all got these core values, and we might get to the end goal, but just all in slightly different ways, is definitely something that should be celebrated. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Got a couple for you now, Patrick, if that's all right. We've got one's asked, how do we offer individual packages for people whilst still ensuring fairness and consistency?
That is a good question. An approach that we've taken since day one at Peakon is we have an open and transparent salary model. And probably some people on this call will say, what? But we took the approach from day one that we wanted to have transparency across the organization around what roles get paid what amount of money. And it's not specific to person, it's more specific to roles. But there is a very transparent spreadsheet in Peakon that shows all of the different roles, the different levels, and what the level of pay is for every role that we have in the organization. That may sound a bit radical for some organizations, but really what that has done is empowered us to have full transparency around what packages people are getting. And we also have consistency around, we have different regions, obviously, and we have offices in 5 countries around the world. So obviously those different regions have different package offerings when it comes to total pay package, but we're incredibly transparent about what those packages look like. And the biggest transparency is around what the pay is. So if you, we have found that the question around individual packages kind of goes away. Like, what did the person sitting next to me get offered? Because we're transparent around what people get paid at the company. So now I'm not saying every organization needs to go out and make this radical change, because in reality, that's maybe not the easiest thing to do for a lot of companies, but forcing ourselves to think more about how we can be more transparent about what we are offering from a package perspective and what we're changing for the future with packages and with offerings. I think that is where organizations will start to see a little bit more success around people feeling that, is it shrouded behind a mystery of what this individual gets versus that individual. So yeah, it's we haven't had a challenge with it because of the 100% transparency around pay.
Yeah.
But I know that may sound a bit forward thinking.
No, it's very interesting. There's a book I read by a guy called Ricardo Semler, who's the CEO of it's a manufacturing company in Brazil, Semco Partners.
Yeah.
They take it even further than that, where I think the employees, I think they get a certain amount of their salary is fixed and agreed, but a significant chunk of their salary is just decided by the employees, as in they decide how much of the wage bill should be allocated to each department, and then within each of those departments, the employees decide, right, you know what, you have been working extraordinarily hard, or you are absolutely the linchpin of this of what our department does, so you should be earning more.
That's
and
brilliant.
it's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, that is incredibly forward thinking. But honestly, I do think we're talking about generations in the workforce. And this is rough estimates, but I believe within the next 2 years, 70% of our workforce will be Gen Z and millennials, the global workforce. And those types of programs, perspectives, approaches, they are expected of younger generations in the workforce. So we should all start looking now at what we can do to be a bit creative and change, because in 2 to 3 years, when these workforces are 70% under 40 years old or 45 years old, then that's something we're going to have to be facing.
Someone on your previous point, actually, Patrick, has asked whether Peak can offer a salary range, or is it a set level?
It depends. It depends. There's different levels within a role. So, for example, an engineer could have multiple levels, and the levels are within a range. So there could be, for example, there could be 6 levels within a role, and all of those roles have a different salary associated with it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. There's a couple around more along the themes of fairness and consistency. So one question is, how do you view the divisive nature of this, or potentially divisive nature of this? So in many industries such as manufacturing, a big chunk of the workforce don't have the opportunity to work from home, whilst those in office-based roles do. So it can exaggerate existing divisions. And similar question is it reasonable for employers to limit working from home opportunities to employees who can, to appease sections of the workforce that physically can't work from home? Patrick, do you want to maybe take that one as well?
Yeah, there clearly is, for example, you would talk about organization Ford. We were just talking about Ford. I mean, there are clearly roles that need to be working in a manufacturing plant, right, to build cars, right? I would say limiting. I don't think that the solution is limiting some groups of employees from being able to do something to allow or to balance out for another group of employees. I think the focus should be how can we somehow empower flexibility in that different work environment that can't work from home in a way that is understandable and acceptable to the needs of the business, and also that's going to be of benefit to the employee. So an example of that is, yes, we have a group of employees that can work from home because their role allows them to. The work that they do doesn't require them to be in the office. But those other employees that do require them to be in some sort of an office or some sort of a work environment, why don't we look at flexible shift hours? Maybe we look at employees being able to choose what their work shifts are, as opposed to having a set 3-4 shifts in a day. So that could have a lot of benefit to that group of employees. Or maybe there's super flexibility around it. They can choose for a couple of months they work this shift, for a couple of months they work this, or even maybe weekly they're able to choose, oh, I'm going to come in at 7 o'clock this week and maybe 8 o'clock the next week, or 9 o'clock. Those may not sound, well, I mean, I'm sure that those add a lot of complexity to organizational and business work, but I think organizations are going to have to figure out how to make things like that work. Because if we take away from one group just to show, well, we're going to limit here, I don't think that's the answer. I think it's figuring out how do we get something working in a unique and creative way for that group that can't work from home, so that they feel that it is the same level of benefit to them as that group of employees that is able to work from home.
Yeah, I
Right.
would agree, and I would just add on to that as well, that when we spoke about maybe if you're looking to hire for in a hybrid or remote working role, I spoke about discovering that candidate's intention. And I think that with this similar scenario, it can come back to actually discovering that existing employee's intention. So if the intention is simply, well, that team get to work from home and I don't, then we need to dig a bit deeper to find out, actually, is there something in a similar way that actually you want to simplify childcare arrangements or drop-offs or commuting, or if there is a desire to relocate and move house or something like that. There has to be a balance between, clearly we can't achieve both your desire to relocate and also have you when we need you in the manufacturing plant type thing. There has to be a balance there. But really, I think, again, it's getting to the heart of what the employee is trying to achieve and their intention by potentially having a remote or hybrid working model, as opposed to just for the sake of it or because everybody else is now doing it. I really don't think that will stand up or last a length of time, really, like Patrick mentioned.
Yeah, it's a brilliant point. Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question. So it's going to be, I'm going to open it up to both of you, starting with you, Megan. What would you say are the key challenges employers need to consider over the next year or so?
Well, that's a really broad question, isn't it? I guess.
It is, yeah. Specifically with the move to more remote working and the hybrid model of work.
Yeah, I think one of the first things that obviously has come into my head there is around communication. So I think quite rapidly when, back in March when things went remote really quickly, people began to know, okay, we have to communicate all of the time. So whether that was maybe constant from the employer themselves and making that quite formal, or whether it was, okay, we need to have a daily catch up every day at 8:30 before we start our day. It might have been forced, it might have been more or less contact than that. But I think a lot of that communication has now sometimes dropped off. And I think one of the key challenges will be for employers to engage with their staff with worthwhile communications and conversations, so it doesn't just feel forced, as was mentioned earlier about just checking that you're online, checking that you really are. are there and that you're at home, or that you where you said you would be. So employers are going to want visibility about what's coming. You know, we've kind of got through 6 months now or longer, and we want to be a part of actually what's happening in the next 6 months. We want communication around that, transparency, visibility, and we want to be a part of it. So I think that will be a key challenge for employers to actually kind of take on the employee views, listen to feedback, and really engage with them about what the future looks like. And if they don't kind of have that clear communication and that constant evolving conversation, I think it will be a huge detriment to their ability to retain staff, or worse, they will retain them, but they'll have deeply disengaged employees. And when you're then onboarding new people, your culture will just rapidly deteriorate.
Great, thank you very much. And same question to you, Patrick.
Yeah, I think I fully agree with what Megan said. I think there's I briefly touched on this in the presentation, but there's 3 areas that I think are going to be challenges for organizations, but critically important for organizations to figure out. One is, well, there's trust, autonomy, and goal setting. Focusing on those 3 areas with employees and not focusing on productivity, I think, is really going to be a challenge, because we think about flexible working, and many organizations, and people that are on the call right now, you may have had these conversations with some other members of the executive team or your colleagues, or organizations can be a bit wary about, okay, well, we have flexible work, we have people not in the office, are they going to be working? Are they going to be providing as much output? And we have seen not only in the data, but we've just seen with so many organizations that the success is coming from those 3 areas. If we focus on empowering autonomy, trust, and specific goal settings, that employees know what's expected of them by a certain time, and we manage to that work output, then ultimately, I think this flexible working and hybrid model will work. Because if we're really worried about about productivity, and we're trying to create a flexible work environment and a hybrid work environment, I think that can have a natural rub to it. But if we focus on the right areas around autonomy, trust, and goal setting, I feel these hybrid flexible working environments will succeed.
Right, thank you very much. I'm just going to add my own one as well, which is something I've sort of noticed and aware of, is that it's very specific to certain roles, but where they're knowledge-based, hiring in and developing and training people to take on roles such as whether it's customer support or maybe remote sales roles, where a lot of that knowledge is gained from, in the early days, you learn by doing, and having your colleagues or line manager not necessarily even formally listening in to what it is that you're saying, but just being able to be there and pick up on a few trends and give you some informal guidance. That makes that journey to being fully productive that bit harder. So some very specific focus, I think, needs to be given by employers as to how they develop, particularly their new starters in those sorts of roles. Right, sadly, that's all we have time for. So well, look, a huge thank you, Patrick and Megan, for your presentations. I really enjoyed them, and thank you for all of your insights in the Q&A session as well. If anyone would like to discover more about Ciphr's solutions, please visit ciphr.com for further details. And for more information about Peakon's employee success platform, please go to peakon.com. That's peakon.com. There will be a short survey when you exit the webinar, which will help us improve our webinars in the future. So please do take a moment to fill it in if you can. And thank you very much for joining us today. I do hope to see you at another Ciphr webinar in the future. Many thanks.